To clamp or not to clamp? That is the question we're going to be answering today on Body Piercing Basics, episode number 27. So stick around. For those that are new to the channel, my name is DaVo. I'm a professional body piercer and have been since 1994. I'm the owner and operator of the Axiom Body Piercing Studio located in Des Moines, Iowa, and Side Skin Kitchen Tattoo. So I'm going to be talking to you as an expert of somebody that has used these tools and has done piercings with forceps and without, freehand, and with needle receiving tubes for my entire career. First off, I should probably explain those that are new to piercing what forceps are and what clamping is all about. Forceps come in pretty much two main varieties. The first one being Pennington forceps, which, as you can see, have a triangle tip to them. The other type, Bollinger forceps, or sometimes called sponge forceps. They have a much broader, wider hole and are round. Now, why two types? Penningtons are probably the universally most used forceps you're going to see. Sometimes they have a rounded tip to them, sometimes they don't, but they're probably the most common. They're like a utility knife. They can be used throughout the entire body. Bollingers, usually we use those only in situations where we want to be able to keep the clamps in place while we insert the jewelry. The two primary places that would be cheek piercings and tongue piercings. Now, why do we use forceps and what's the advantage of it? Forceps do a number of different things. The first thing they do is they compress and compact that tissue. The reason why this is important is it gives the needle a shorter distance to travel, it causes less trauma to the area, and makes the piercing a little bit quicker and less painful. The next thing is that it allows the piercer to manipulate the tissue without having direct contact with it, thus keeping their little fingers out of the way. So it's a safety issue. The last thing is in situations where areas of the body where the tissue is rolling or shifts easily when pressure is applied to it. The biggest number one thing with that one as far as piercings would be trachea piercings. If you don't have your trachea pierced, a good way to kind of explain how to do it is put your thumb inside your ear canal, not all the way in, just a little bit in, and then pinch down. Now move your index finger away from your face and toward your face. Do you feel how that tissue kind of rolls back and forth? There are a few places, especially on the ear, where it does that quite a bit. In those cases, flattening out that tissue and holding it in place is going to make sure that the piercing is placed correctly. If we just pierce it freehand, there's a possibility of that tissue shifting or moving, and you'll end up with a crooked piercing. The other advantage to it is it allows the piercer to line up the piercing and have something to gauge whether or not the piercing is straight or not. And, of course, with those two dots closer together, it makes it easier for him or her to make sure that the piercing is straight. Why would you want to do freehand? There are a number of piercings throughout the body where freehand is a better option. And the reason being is that if you clamp them, it tends to distort the tissue. It doesn't let it set naturally. So even though you've lined up everything and you think it's right, you clamp it, it kind of bends or shifts a little bit, and then you put the needle through and then take the clamps off, and it's a little crooked this way or that way, or it's completely off. The other reason is in situations where you're working in a tight area where there really isn't enough room for the forceps to be in there to allow the needle to pass through in the correct place. So what would be some examples of that? Would be like upper ear helixes or forward helixes, some genital piercings where it's going to really distort the tissue a lot. And it's going to make the piercing a lot more painful and uncomfortable to do, and the results are not going to be what you want. So, I do a number of freehand piercings. Another example that would be septum piercings. It's my experience when they are clamped, it tends to distort that tissue a great deal. So, When I'm doing things freehand, one of the reasons why I'm doing that is I can look at the tissue, see how it lays naturally, and adjust the angle of the piercing and the depth of the piercing to how it sits naturally. With forceps, you're kind of constricted to what exactly is marked and how the forceps constrict that area. There are a lot of people out there that believe that forceps are just a bad idea because they add additional trauma to the piercing, bruising, etc., and pain. Personally, I think that there's a number of piercings that you can do with forceps that are going to be less painful without them. Partly because one of the things a forceps does is it supports the tissue. If you pierce an area that is very lactistic, and is flexing the whole time, there's more of an increased likelihood that it's going to either misalign and the angle is going to be wrong, or it's going to pretty much just tear through the tissue instead of cutting through it smoothly like we want it to, which is going to be less painful. Yes, they do not feel good on certain parts of the anatomy, especially nipples. They do not feel good. I know that from my own personal experience. It was not a fun thing to have on there. But they would hurt a lot more if if the piercer just pinches the area and then tries to shove something through it. The other thing with like nipple piercings, especially where angle is very important and placement is very important, or they just don't heal right or look right. If you do it freehand, you're more apt to be deeper on one side than the other side, just basically because of the natural shape of the upper body. It's not flat, it's curved, people. And you need to adapt to it. The other big issue I have with freehand piercings that would be better to clamp, like tongue piercings and all kinds of other things and eyebrow piercings, is usually the method most people use is clamping with their fingers. So basically what they're doing is they're flattening out the tissue with their fingers, which means that their fingers are going to be in the way if they misguide the needle or aren't paying attention and could get a needle strike, which could be a health issue not only for the piercer, but also their clients. It just doesn't make sense. The only thing I can possibly think, most of the people that I've talked to that have been in this don't clamp anything phase, what they've told me is it's just one less way to contaminate the piercing. First off, your gloves are coming in contact with the piercing area. Are they completely sterile? Did you not touch anything else? Are you living in a vacuum? Because there's just as much contaminants, if not more, on those gloves that you're using. The other thing is I often think it's just because they're lazy. Because if they use these, that means they have to decontaminate these. They have to clean these. They have to ultrasound them, and they have to rebag them and autoclave them again. So it's less work and less investment if you don't use forceps. I'm going to finish out by going through some of the more common piercings that I use forceps on and what I do freehand, and kind of give you an idea of what you're looking at. Piercings I do with forceps: eyebrows, lips, labres or lower lip piercings, the upper labre style piercings, the beauty marks, Madonnas, whatever they're called this week, Monroes, and the Medusa, which is dead center, and vertical labres or laberts, depending on what you want to call, or labros. Cheek piercings, tongue piercings, do those with forceps. Trachea piercings, as I mentioned earlier, do those with forceps. Nipple piercings, of course, navel piercings. Genital piercings on men, I usually do frenums, scrotums, haftas, gishes, sometimes ditoids, but that's kind of an anatomy thing. And on women, I generally only use them for horizontal clitoral hood piercings, sometimes on triangle piercings, but that's such a rare piercing to begin with, and labias, minoras, and minoras. Okay, so in the ear, things that I suggest doing freehand. Personally, most of the ear I do freehand, unless the anatomy requires me to use forceps. And generally, most of them, I like to have that tissue be in its natural state when I dictate what angle that piercing is going to be at. So things like earlobe piercings, upper ear cartilage, helixes, forward and so forth, rooks, dafes, Those I all do are antitrachus and snugs. I usually do freehand. Septum piercings. Septum piercings, it's kind of a flip of a coin, but personally, I found a long time ago that when you clamp down that tissue, it tends to twist or turn one way or another. It has the exact opposite effect that clamping a trachea is going to have, or an antitrachus. It's going to do this weird thing where you pierce it, and then even though you were diligent about your marks and you thought it was completely straight, when you take the forceps off, the tissue changes so much that it tends to be one way or another. Other things I do freehand, or with septums I usually do with a needle receiving tube on one side, just inject and clear. Other piercings I do freehand would be male genital piercings, Prince Albert's with a needle receiving tube, of course. Sometimes dioids. Females, always VCHs. Always do those freehand with a needle receiving tube. Christina's, kind of flip of the coin on that one. There are some piercings I don't do. For example, I don't do affidelias or amplings. Those just never appealed to me and never was trained to do them, so I don't touch them. They can be done with forceps. I've heard and seen them done that way, or they're done freehand. And it's usually a 2-push piercing. Think about that one for a minute, especially if you know where those piercings are at. That's it. I hope you learned something. I hope I explained it correctly. This is kind of one of those confusing subjects, and maybe it's a little too inside baseball, but the next time you go see your piercer, you have some things to talk about if they pull the forceps out or if they don't. And maybe something to look for and maybe something to discuss with your piercer when you go in if they insist on doing something freehand that probably shouldn't be done freehand, in my opinion. If you disagreed or agreed, please leave a comment. If you feel like I've covered something but I didn't cover it in depth enough, please leave a comment. I'm happy to answer questions. I usually answer comments when I have time. If you liked the video, please give me a thumbs up. It's like applauding. It makes us all happy. If you would like to see more of these in the future, including all our tattoo content, please, if you haven't already, subscribe and hit that notification bell. Also, check out our merch store at spreadsheet.com. Link in the description. Buy some cool merch and help support the channel and say, hey, we like what you're doing. Here you go. Till next time, I hope all your piercings heal with ease and without issue. And if you're in the Des Moines, Iowa area, I hope to see you for your body piercing needs in the future.